wife except for sexual immorality and marries another woman who commits adultery. Why does it say except for sexual immorality? So would the man in the case be actually legitimate divorcing from the wife? Who's just
Well, so whoever gets this, suddenly, I don't know.
Repeat the question first.
So his question is, in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus states that anyone who divorces his wife and marries another, with the exception of sexual immorality, commits adultery. That's right? So the question is why? Why would that be an exception, and why would that be acceptable? First, I think it's important, to note, based on the church's teaching, that divorce is not preferred. I mean, divorce is not what anyone wants. Jesus never wanted it. But at the time, who he was addressing, they were all getting divorces. And there were laws, and he goes on to explain about Moses permitted divorce because of the hardness of your hearts. And so there was a pastoral acceptance, I shouldn't say acceptance, but maybe toleration of divorce in certain cases. And so Jesus was making a point, I think, about, and again, I can't put words in his mouth, and I try to reflect his words. And I don't want to get into technology or technical stuff because I'm not an expert on like the laws of marriage and things like that. There are canon lawyers that would know more than me. But the reality is understanding that there are reasons why two people are not compatible. There are reasons why the church doesn't ask, for instance, of a woman who's being battered to remain married to the man, right? And the church in that way would permit divorce, right? And would encourage the woman not to be in the same house to receive, physical or mental abuse in any shape or form. So to understand that divorce is not necessarily a black and white situation, I think is what Jesus would be reflecting. Someone else may have a better answer than that, because I can't speak, because I don't know, was Jesus listing the only possible exclusion from the rule of no divorce and remarriage? And of course, I do want to emphasize that the church's teaching about divorce, what's in the news right now about divorce and Holy Communion, is the key to remember is divorce and then civil remarriage, right? That's important to understand. The divorced are not excommunicated. The divorced are not told they're no longer belonging in the church and they aren't loved, that they've committed heinous sin, etc., etc. That sometimes divorce is a natural course of events that takes place. Is it unhappy? Yes. Do we wish it? No. And the reality is, but it does happen. But the understanding of the sacrament, what's taken place, and then also receiving Holy Communion, it's important to understand that the people who are divorced who then civilly remarry, in other words, not going through the normal process of the church to determine whether their original bond was sacramental or not. Does that answer your question, or is that just a lot of words to confuse?
Building on that, I think another way of looking at that teaching is to remember what life was like in the first century. If you really pay attention to what's said, is when a man divorces a woman. So there's one thing Jesus is focusing on there is the power imbalance inherent in that nature of marriage. Because what would happen subsequent to that divorce, the woman would be out on the street, literally. And so one thing Jesus is saying, look, you can't just toss people aside that way. Now, and then so he goes on to say, but, every situation is different. There's always there may be a justification for it. But I think Deacon Jeff is absolutely correct that the notion of remarriage after divorce is what's important in terms of whether there becomes a legal problem for full communion in the church. And that's what's being debated right now at the Vatican and other places, is how, pastorally, how do we deal with that, right? Because if I kill Deacon Jeff, which God forgive me if I did, and I go to confession and I repent of that sin and receive absolution, I can go to communion the next day. Deacon Jeff, unfortunately, in that scenario, is still dead. Well, how do you passionately take care of the situation where someone has divorced, remarried, they're in what the church calls an irregular marriage, they repent of that, but just as Jesus says you can't set that person aside, all right, what do you do with that? And I think in prayer, as a church, we're going to have to figure that out. But you certainly can't throw folks away. The largest section, Craig Strickland, the pastor at Hope Presbyterian, will tell you, the largest group in his church are divorced and remarried Catholics who don't feel at home in the Catholic Church. And he famously called Bishop Stive and said, "Come get your people. They're messing up my church." And what he meant by that was, they're bringing a lot of Catholic theology, God forbid, into the Presbyterian Church. Maybe that's the Holy Spirit working. I don't know. But it's something we got to deal with. And what's great about being a deacon is that's not our job to figure out all that theology. We're just here to serve. There you go.
So what's the Catholic teaching? If somebody divorces and they do not remarry, can they still get communion? Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Unless they've murdered Deacon Jeff.
Right. That's a separate issue.
The answer is yes. They are still full. Is it a sad situation? Absolutely. And should there be work towards reconciliation and so when I encounter people like in RCIA who have divorced, they want to become Catholic, I will talk to them about, now you understand that maybe an idea is like, just go ahead and start working on that process of annulment, which if you understand what annulment is, it's not Catholic divorce. It's not like saying that, you're married, you're no longer married. It's saying that while you may have contractually or civilly married, the church recognizes that the sacramentality of your marriage was null. There was God didn't ordain that marriage. God didn't want that marriage to happen. We see that so often. I know we have some people that actually wrote, is this piggybacking on the same?
Just to ask one simple
Yes.
question about that. Then why, the cost of annulments have been so detrimental, I think, to Catholics. Annulments. I know my nephew married a girl, and within 3 weeks of their marriage, she fooled around and got pregnant from another man, and and he's married to a beautiful Catholic girl, but they did not get married in the Catholic Church because his first wife of 3 weeks refuses to give him an annulment, refuses to fill out the work or paperwork, and he's like, "This is ridiculous. It's going to cost him $3,000, and they're just a young couple. He can't afford that."
They need to come to Memphis.
In the Diocese of Memphis, there's no funding.
Pope Francis has moved to really reduce the cost and the impediment to
And some dioceses will charge money for the legal fees that are required, and the documents have to get filed in the search and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure the Diocese of Memphis would welcome anybody who wanted to pay that amount, but I don't think that they never make money required.
But in the Diocese of Memphis.
Right, and also you were saying that she wouldn't give him an annulment. We have to be careful how we word things, because the reality is if that other partner does not want to participate, that doesn't mean that the nullity can't be declared. If she refuses to testify, that just means her presence is not going to be known to the tribunal, to the court. That other witnesses will be gathered, and if that case is seen by the church as one where there were impediments, there were reasons why they should not have been married, then that nullity can be granted with her permission or not.
And at least in the Diocese of Memphis, the tribunal bends over backwards to communicate, to be sure the two parties involved understand their rights of participation, limits of participation. So, I've worked in tribunal for 25 years now, and there's no doubt in my mind that this diocese has worked extremely hard to make sure that's. So, that's a good thing. And like just what Jeff was saying, the nullity is granted on recommendation of the tribunal. So what I'm saying is that it's not one party or the other granting anything. Okay. It's a petition. Okay, so we'll be quiet.
I'm a lawyer, and nullity is declared. It's not granted. The church is trying to determine whether or not a sacramental marriage was contracted. So I would even differ just a little bit from Deacon Jeff. It's not what God intended. God might have intended all kinds of things for this couple, but for some reason, immaturity, prior marriage, there are different grounds, a marriage, a sacramental marriage could not be formed. And the church declares that that was so, that there never was. And so the overriding idea of all of this is you can only have one living spouse, right? That's simple. I mean, we understand that, but that's what all of this comes down to. And when I've talked with people, they come to me too. And they say, well, I don't know that I want to do that. I said, well, do you feel like you have a living spouse? Well, yes, I do. Well, then you can't marry another. But if you feel like there never was this marriage, then yes, you should ask the church to declare that. But that's kind of the overriding idea. As simple as that.
Jim, you want to read y'all's question? Y'all have a question?
Yeah, let me get to this one. Those are good, okay, and they're on people's minds. Let's go on here. We have found FaceTime, use of a phone, computer, or iPad to be helpful for our family's distance and location, Germany, Cleveland, California. Well, let me make a quick comment to that. We only have a few minutes, but I will again praise Jennie. Jennie has done a great job of causing us to have family conference calls. Technologically, it is possible to connect your family wherever they are on any of these particular devices, and we have family calls together. It's not ideal. All of us say, we have a granddaughter in California, and when we go visit, she looks at us and says, "You're out of the box. What do I do with you? You're three-dimensional." Okay, so it's not as good, but it still has good value. But it can still be, can it not be, a family event. Jennie coordinates these. I don't care if people live in Germany or wherever. Internet works all over the world, and so it happens, okay? It can happen that way with some discipline and intentionality. Do you agree?
Right, and I would say about technology, I mean, I was somewhat tongue-in-cheek about the screen, not entirely. Technology is what you make of it,
It is.
right?
Like any
You
other gift.
watching a movie together is very different from everybody huddling up in their own little corner of the house. And using technology to bring people together is always a good thing.
Yeah, technology is amoral. It doesn't have morals. It's how we utilize it. And I will ratify the idea, like when we go out to dinner or when we're at dinner, I confiscate the phones if they ever come out. It just takes doing that once and all the rest of them realize, oh,
And
goes
then
back in the
sometimes we're
pocket.
using them to share pictures.
Well, no, and that's okay. And a case in point, my wife and I were sitting on the couch, and we both had our phones out. And so two of my kids came in, and one of them pointed and said, "Busted! You've been telling us you're not allowed to blah, 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 blah." And so we both held our phones up, and we were playing Words with Friends with each other. So we were present to each other. We were using the device as a board game.
Oh, I
right?
think, yeah, we've got a text message channel, the family channel, and, you know, kids are funny. I mean, we
Right.
share things, and then we'll comment on what everybody's doing, and there'll be a GIF, and it's funny. I mean, it's great.
Well, the Catholic idea of all things in moderation is really what's important, I think, in looking at
And we're hoping with screenagers will learn how to navigate these systems
Yeah.
and use them to their benefit and not to the detriment. So y'all take these with you, put them up in your church. This is not just for CMA. It's open to everybody. It's going to be at St. Louis Parish. And so, you know, we as the CMA, we're paying the $700 to get the video here. So we're hoping people will come and we'll learn from this. So it just kind of goes in with what you're saying.
I've got a question. You got a question?
All right, just to show that we're not afraid to take on the tough questions. What's the position of the church on same-sex marriage? I know same-sex couple members of RCIA still going to church. Well, I mean, I think the position of the church is pretty clear, and that is marriage between a man and a woman, Adam and Eve, and anything else is not a marriage. And I think it's very important to point out that being gay is not a sin. And the church calls us not to discriminate, not to exclude people with same-sex attraction. The question is, do you live that out? It's the same way as a single straight person. Am I living out my sexuality in a Christian way? And if you're gonna, and I'm just gonna say, if you're gonna come down on the same-sex couple that cohabitate, you better come down on the heterosexual couple that cohabitates as well. Because sin is sin, and it's not, one is not worse than the other. And I'll be quick to say, I'm not here to judge anybody's lifestyle. That's between them and their maker and their own conscience to a certain extent. But in terms of what is the church's position on that is pretty clear. That's another societal thing we've got to deal with. We've got to deal with all of our natural inclination to be not to judge or come down hard on individuals. I mean, it's real easy to talk about this, I think, on a theoretical level until you're faced with two actual people who want to do the right thing but are in the midst of their own pilgrimage and their own journey. And one of the corporal works of mercy is to instruct the sinner. And so part of it is to show them what the church teaches and to help them make their own way to that. But as the church, we hold up the ideal. And the ideal is the family that we've all talked about, the marriage that we've all talked about. And I'm not going to pretend that pastorally it's easy to exclude someone from communion or to have these conversations, but I think we've got to have the conversations. And again, I think you can't assume that there isn't some pastoral effort being made in that person's life. And that really, as a member of the parish, as a deacon, it's not my job to judge. That's somebody else's job who's much higher up in the food chain than I am.
Yeah, so we take judgment out of the picture. I totally agree. And we also, and I think to go further than what you were saying in terms of like not discriminating or treating people or excluding people, we have to go the extra mile of being merciful and compassionate and purposefully including, while at the same time somehow balancing never ever backing away from the truth, and to speak the truth in love and in mercy. And if we count everything, it's just like when I teach people parenting from my own personal experience, if someone ever asks like, well, what do you know? Okay, well, 9 kids. And here's what I've learned. One of the things I've learned is it's the same thing I learned in corporate America. You know, there it's being recorded, it's called the crap sandwich, right? If you have to deliver bad news, you put good news on the front and the back. Like, like with my kids, I love you so much. I would do anything for it. I would die for you. But this isn't going to work. You can't live like this. You can't continue to do that. But understand how much I love you. That's why I'm telling you this. And so what I've just delivered is the crap sandwich. The kid's going to think, that's crap, that middle part. But if it's couched in love, because it truly is, it makes a world of difference. So when you're talking to someone about sin, about scandal, about a lifestyle, these are real people we're talking about. We're not talking about theoretical people. They're in our families, they're our friends, they're people that we work with. And it's not popular to be at work to say, I'm not coming to the wedding because I think that's a sinful relationship. Well, you don't want to raise your hand and say that. Do you want to have some kind of conversation? Yes. Every situation is different. How do we do that? But the church is not going to change her teaching in terms of what's right and what's wrong. However, the church can continue to do a better job of being pastoral and helping people navigate that thorny road. It's a difficult path.
And we're all sinners. We're all sinners, and we all have something that we all have a cross to bear. And so I don't think it's appropriate. That's what I don't like about this conversation, is because it's so visible oftentimes that if my sin is private, I don't have to worry about the whole parish knowing my business and talking about my situation. Well, why is he a lector if he's blah blah? And it's a part of it that has to be done, but we all have to come from it in the sense that we all live in sinful brokenness, and we're all trying to get to the same place.
I just want to follow up. If you notice, the distinction that's being made is very important. As a father, Jeff has care of the souls of his minor children, and maybe his children forever. So he has a role to play in their spiritual formation. As a member of a parish, he doesn't have any responsibility for me, for my soul. My pastor does. If I'm spiritual director to someone, and then I have that relationship. If someone comes and asks me, what does the church teach? I respond what the church teaches. If someone asks me, what should I do? Then they're inviting me into that conversation. But I think that's the place where I try to be careful. I teach what the church teaches if I'm asked to teach it. I don't get involved in other people's lives unless they invite me in and they ask those questions. And that is a pretty, and I've had to have some of those, I didn't know what to call them that, but I've had those conversations with my children. Yeah, because I do have that responsibility. So that's how I manage to.
Well, and then also, I would never disagree with the judge, because I know where I'll end up. But I don't want to make it so easy sometimes to back away from things. I think God puts people in our paths sometimes and gives us places to be, to essentially spread His word. But how we do that, that's the key. It's never, ever done with the finger wagging or pointing or you admonishing the sinner, and it comes across as that way. But there are opportunities. There are people that we encounter where God has entrusted them to us for whatever reason.
And that's the point. The relationship has to come first.
Right. No, you're exactly right.
Otherwise, what do they care what you think about what they do?
I'm not in contempt.
They have to know that you care enough about to speak the truth. So I have a question
all
about.
called to chastity. That's just the bottom line.
Amen.
We're all called to chastity, no matter
And
what.
you are Mary.
Mary Pat Chastity. So I have a question from Dr. Santiago. Tell me why Benedictine spirituality is better than Jesuit spirituality. It's not.
Well, one is Catholic.
Yeah, one is Catholic.
One is Catholic.
I'm not saying which one.
I love it, Jeff.
Here's why I prefer Benedictine spirituality. Number one, it's older. Jesuit spirituality, Ignatius of Loyola went to a Benedictine to learn a lot of what he learned. So, hey,
There you go.
always go to the original. Two, we were talking about families today. The Jesuits are a strike force. They're individuals. They're part of an order, but they can be sent as one person across the earth. Benedictines, St. Benedict believed that you didn't have to do hair shirts and flagellations and all that. Living in community was asceticism enough for anybody. It was hard enough. So we're talking about families here, community life. I feel like, at least for me, the Benedictine spirituality is more accessible. It's helpful to have a community. We gather together, we talk about our problems, we read the rule together. Well, how does this apply to our life? All of those things. So, I mean, I have lots of Jesuit friends. They're very brainy, and I go to them when I have brainy questions. But for everyday, how to live out this life, I just think Benedictine spirituality has an awful lot to offer us.
It's a personal journey.
It is. And I've told this story before. I came to the church because of St. Teresa of Avila 25 years ago, October 15th. Mary Pat was there.
I remember.
Yeah. So I always thought I was going to be a lay Carmelite. I kept waiting for the Carmelites to find me. I mean, I'm a good daughter of Teresa. They never did. But I learned about Edith Stein, who became a Carmelite, but spent her Easters and her Holy Weeks at the Abbey in Boren. And she took the name Benedicta in religion, and I took the name Benedicta when I became an oblate. So it's an homage, if you will, to Edith Stein, who was a Carmelite Benedictine, or a Benedictine Carmelite.
Kathy, do we have time for another one?
Yeah, go ahead. Okay.
So here's one. Can a wife have male friends, or vice versa? Can a husband have female friends? And everyone would say, oh, absolutely. There's absolutely no problem with that. I will just say that the answer is yes, but. There's always a but. And the answer is yes, but how close is the friend? There's an important concept in church teaching and community and the body of Christ, and that is the concept of bringing scandal. What is to be scandalous? What does that mean? It doesn't mean that you're doing anything. It has the appearance of doing something. So if a man and a woman are good friends and they decide to buy a house together and they live their life together, and yet they're not living in a marital relationship, they're not having marital relations, there is the appearance that they are. And so to some degree, they are actually culpable to the concept of giving scandal. What is it? How is it? Our kids seeing this and they thinking, well, they're certainly together. So we have to always be aware. So can a man who's married have a female friend? Absolutely. But for myself, once I became married, who I spent time with said a lot about who I am. And if I have female friends, which I do I usually, would I go to lunch with them by myself at a public restaurant? Probably not. I know that we're not doing anything. She knows we're not doing anything. But the passersby don't know that we're not doing anything. And so we just have to be aware that we cast a vision, and people see us and they can assume things, maybe even wrongly. And even in innocence, there's things that can cause people scandal and can cause scandal. This is why the thing about people who are in RCIA, but they're cohabiting, or their same-sex partner, they're together there, and they give the appearance of, well, there are some issues that need to be aware that maybe it's not best to have someone who is living in a relationship like that to be public about certain functions and forms in the church. But again, all of this has to be done in a prudent, pastoral, loving, and merciful way. There are proper channels. You don't stand up and you don't call people out and sin and who are you, because we are all sinners.
Yeah.
And
Father Herbert said we're all sinners. Some of us get caught.
Yeah, that's right. And so this idea of once we're married, can we never talk to another woman? The answer is no, that's not the case. But once we're married, should we, me and this lady, when we were in college, we used to go camping together. We didn't do anything, we were just friends. Well, that's great. Now that you're married, you probably shouldn't go camping with your friend, right? We all laugh because it gives scandal, because you're going like, well, I know what's going to happen. No, you don't know, but other people who don't know that situation, I have to be careful with what I do and what I say when I'm wearing a collar. Because I now speak on behalf of the church. And so when I say something, it's Bishop Holly speaking. And he doesn't want to get a phone call. And it says, this deacon flipped me off while we were driving. Here's his license number. And the reality is giving scandal and our appearance is part of who we are.
I think maybe Alan can speak to this too. I think it depends in part on the profession that you're in. Since I'm in law and more than half of lawyers are men, I have lots of men friends. I have lunch with them, but I would never have dinner with them. So maybe that's the line that I
you
draw.
discriminate how you spend your time, and then also within your family relationships, people, if they know that this is some lawyer that she's known for 45 years, or a mentor, a professor, want to have lunch is not a problem. Maybe even a dinner when he comes in town. But the reality is, where we do it, how we do it, do we intertwine our arms while we drink out of a wine glass?
No, and Jim's
Probably
always,
not.
If we're having
Do we
dinner,
have wine and wine?
if we're having dinner, Jim is always invited. Lunch, we work on opposite sides of the city, so.
No, these are all.
But I think your point is well taken. Just be thoughtful about it.
What are other people seeing?
Avoid the near occasion of sin, right? Don't we pray that about once a month?
There was only one other question, I think, that we had. Well, real quick, top 3 things couples should do before getting married. Now, if you ask the average person, number 1 is have sex. Number 2 is to buy a house together. Number 3 is to get a dog. And then if those things work out, then get married. Now, that's what the world tells you.
And children are.
So that's obviously not the answer. So I don't know if I know the top 3 things. I do know that prayerful, loving discernment is the number 1 thing. Number 2 probably is preparation from someone who knows about marriage and knows the church's teaching and is going to help you. I do a lot of marriage prep, and most people, when there are divorces nowadays, the vast majority of situations that I've experienced, so anecdotally, I don't know about the data, they just weren't prepared. People just, and then there was a bad job of preparation. They met with a priest a couple of times, and he goes, you know all that stuff, right? Yeah, we all know that. And the reality is they don't. They don't really fully understand what they're engaging in. And so certainly prayerful discernment, is this the one that God has laid before me as my spouse, my knowing him here on earth? How I will know God's love is through the love of my spouse. Is this the one? Or is this a person who's just cute, just funny, just well off, just, witty, whatever? And those are great attractants. But if that's the reason that you're getting married, that's a problem. And the first thing I do with couples is I tell them, I give them an exercise, I tell them to close their eyes, and I describe them, and I ask them what will you look like when you're 80 years old? And what will you feel like when you're 80 years old? And imagine you're sitting on a park bench. Now imagine that you kiss each other passionately. They always open their eyes and go like, ooh, and it's like, see, here's the test. You love this person, you are attracted to this person for many reasons. But those aren't the reasons they're going to keep you together, right? So understanding that, so being prepared for marriage is the most important thing, and most people these days are not.
And I would be remiss as a bankruptcy judge if I didn't add, you must talk about money. You must talk about money. I have couples who had no idea that their intended had student loans, or even their spouse had student loans. And student loans are huge and cripple a couple trying to get started. So you've got to talk about money. You've got to talk about children. You know, what are your thoughts about children? Are you open to children? All of this. And couples don't do that unless the marriage prep walks them through that. But money, of course, is one of those big.
It's the first pressure I think people in a fragile marriage experience, and it
Yeah, I mean, it destroys more marriages than, I don't know, than infidelity, but it's right up there. It's right up there. So you've got to be able to do that.
And, well, and I would echo what they said just in terms of prayer. And one thing that I say in marriage prep that always kind of takes people aback is I say, you know this is a religious experience. And I said it once kind of as a joke, but I now say it all the time because that's really, sometimes that's the first time when young people really, well, what do you mean by that? And that's a great segue into some of the things we've talked about today. But if it's just about the parties and it's just about, well, this is what you're supposed to do when you get out of college. You're supposed to get married and you're supposed to have, well, why are you doing it? And I think that introspection is important. And the last one, I'm not, I hope I get the question right, but basically it's asking, pursuant to the teachings of the church, if a man and a woman get married and there's already a child conceived out of wedlock, is that permissible? As you know, it takes, in the world today, many women co-parent. And so the way I take this question is that having a child before you get married, I'm not aware that that's an impediment. That's not an impediment to getting married, and it certainly shouldn't be the reason that you get married. I think a lot of people historically, that was, well, there's a child, and so we got to get married to legitimize the child, or that's just what you do, and that led to a lot of divorce because the people weren't ready for marriage. But I think if you're ready to get married and you get married, that certainly is not an impediment to getting married.
No, and again, this goes back to what is marriage and who are we? We're sinners. And so we meet people pastorally on the road where they are. In marriage prep, for me, probably 70% of the people that come to me for marriage prep are cohabiting. It's just a reality. They're just doing it. They're not even ashamed. And so when that's the case, then I let them know on front end and say, by the way, my job is to tell you the truth, and here's the truth. The truth is you shouldn't be cohabiting, but you are. So let's talk about this. I'm going to tell you what the teaching is. What you guys do with this, you can lie your way through this and you can get married, but I can tell you your odds for divorce are going to go way up. So just, be honest. And so there's a lot of honesty, but the reality is that's where they are.